According to this bio that I have on Verna, when she wrote her book, Creating Space, My Life and Work in Indigenous Education, it is to bring a sense of history on Aboriginal education in Canada, especially to the young people who rely on their own stories, the oral histories, to track our progress through the years. Verna has lived through and been involved in many of the changes that have taken place. In her book, she shares her stories as she reveals the challenges and the misgivings, the burning questions, the successes and failures that have shaped her life. And I'm very honored to be up here, to be acknowledging this lady, very, very important person in regards to Indian education. And I feel very honored to have known her professionally and now knowing her personally. And so it's with great pleasure that I ask Verna to come up here and speak. Thank you. Miigwech.
Good morning, everybody. I've been in this position a few times, talking to conferences, and I'm pretty sure by now some of you are saying to yourself, Sanamina. There she is again. That's how I feel too, you know. There she is again. Well, I'll tell you, I was encouraged this morning as we listened to Amy and Martin and the kind of thinking they're doing already at such a young age. So you as educators, you are doing a good job. If you can produce people that can think for themselves, like Amy and Martin, and I know you have them in your classes too, you're doing a good job. You know, we spend a lot of time worrying about what we're not doing right, but I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for what we are doing, what we're doing wrong, but what we are doing right, we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. I was really confused about what I could share with you today. You know, when I wrote that darn book, I thought I wouldn't ever have to come and speak to you in front of you again. I thought I told it all, I bared my soul, you know, and so that's where it is. That's my story. But I got really feeling, you know, there's a lot of turmoil right now in the air. You can sense it. And it made me want to say a little prayer myself, like to give thanks to the Creator for bringing us together in prayerful meditation as we continue to explore our rightful place in Indigenous education. And I ask you that our time together be one of mutual respect, discovery, and understanding as we strive to enhance the lives of future generations. We have to stay positive. We have to stay strong. We have to stay committed. We can't go back and forth, believe one thing one day, believe another thing the next day. You have a mind, you have your own thoughts and feelings. You can assess things, and that's what we have to do today. That's what we've had to do in the past. I really like the theme, sounding the drums. There have been many soundings of drums along the way. You know, I think of different things that happened, significant things, like the wabang. That was a drum, strong sound of the drum. So I know that our challenge continues, the call of the drum. And as it's so well put in your literature there for your conference, we must answer the call of the drum and be architects of our own system. That's the challenge. I looked over your program and I saw that you have a lot of exciting workshops. You know, that is the good thing. Sharing was one of the things that is one of our values, is one of the things our forefathers and foremothers believed. And that's what you're doing through this conference. You're sharing ideas. You're trying to put all those ideas together to make the best possible Indigenous education that you can provide for your children. So as I thought about this, I thought, what on earth am I going to talk about? I can't talk about 70 years of schooling. You know, it's 72 years since I started school. You don't want to hear about all that. That's a long time. So I thought I would approach it this way. And I asked Lauren, tried to find out, what do you want me to talk about, you know? And he said, talk about your book, as Shirley said. Talk about your book. And I thought, okay, what am I going to say? I said, yeah, I had a weak moment. Don't have weak moments. Don't be around this guy. Because I think he was trying to bribe me that day, and I thought, oh, this sounds like a good idea. So I said yes. But in the end, I didn't take the bribe. Don't take bribes. So I thought, okay, I've had questions asked of me since the book came out. Oh yes, I asked my friend. I said to her, Carolyn, they want me to speak at this conference. I have no idea what to talk about. They said to talk about your book. She said, just tell them enough so they'll buy it. That was pretty good advice. But anyway, so I wanted to use some of the questions that I've been asked in the last little while. And one of the first questions that comes up, whether you're interviewed for a paper or anything like that, is, why did you write the book? And the day of my book launch, I said, because I'm crazy. You take a heck of a chance when you write your own story, you know, because when you write your own story, you're writing about yourself. It's easy to go against what our people say. It could sound like bragging. We're not supposed to brag about ourselves. We're not supposed to brag about what we do, you know? And it can be construed that way, and I worried about that. But I did it anyway. No, but on the other hand, I had a story to tell. I wanted to tell this story only because, as Shirley mentioned, I have been involved for the last formal education, 72 years when I started school at 6. Now you can figure out that I'm still only 35. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that math works, but, you know, so I wanted to, as Shirley said, the best way to put it is track education through my experience. I hope that when you read the book, you see it wasn't me, it was the time. You can see what happened in the 50s, because nothing much happened before that. In fact, nothing much happened before the 60s that dealt with our rightful place in Indigenous education and in society. So, you know, and you'll see what happened in the 70s and the 80s. And this was a move across the country. These are the kinds of things were happening. If you want to do more research across the country. When I became a teacher, there were only about 20 teachers in all of Canada. That's in the 50s. You know, when I became a counselor, there were counselors across the country too. When I started to think about curriculum, there were curriculum work across the country too. You know, when we did Wabang, it was a national thing. Ours was Wabang, it was happening across the country. When we did Indian control, it was across the country. So I hope that that is the way that you will see that. You know, some of you will have read, everybody here probably reads the Free Press. After my book came out, there was an editorial of all things, a whole column. And the title was, Aboriginal Educator Toots Own Horn. That was me. It was, the writer, I'll say, was a non-native man that I don't think was involved in education. But that, you know, people were phoning me thinking I must be very upset over this. But at that stage, it was done, it was over. Whatever opinions people make of it is their right to do, you know? But then I had to look at it a different way. Commercially, I thought, free advertising. So people want to look and say, okay, what terrible things is she talking about now, or so on. So there's those two sides, you know, the storytelling and the other side that, as I mentioned before, that storytelling is our way, and then we are not supposed to talk about ourselves. I mean, to brag about ourselves. So the next question is, what is the significance of creating space? I'm sorry I misspelled that on the book. It should have read C-R-E-E, creating space. I noticed the Ojibwe's didn't laugh at all. Come on. Anyway, I never even, you know, the hardest thing when you write a book, folks, some of you have written, is to find a title. The title ends up being the last thing that you end up with. You have a working title, but it's the last thing you end up with. And where we didn't come up with this early on, but I thought one time at another conference, Shawayne Dogsuin, a colleague and friend of mine from UBC, Dr. Joanne Archibald, she was the keynote speaker there. And she was talking about developments at the University of British Columbia. And she referred to the work as creating space. You know, making space in the university for our people. Making space in our schools, in the education, in the curriculum, in the language. So, you know, that's what you're doing. It's not that I'm doing just me. I mean, all of you that are here as teachers, you're creating, and more importantly, you're creating a rightful place in education, where the education honors us for who we are, respects us, our traditions, our cultures, our languages, so that our children could grow up to be whole people. So, but another question I've been asked is, to what do you attribute your devotion to education? If you read my book, I just loved school all along. I'm just a, I don't know what to call myself, but because I loved school. Maybe because the school was right next door to me. I could walk like almost to the end of this hallway here. That's how close I was to the school. And when I was 3 and 4 years old, I'd go and knock on the door, trying to go to school, and they'd send me home. They'd say, "You're too young," you know? So I was doing that. So I loved school. You know, I think also maybe it was recess. I liked recess. No, but I would see the kids out there playing. My mother would say, "You've got to stay home and help me with the laundry tomorrow. You know, we've got to wash all these clothes, all these thick men underwear and stuff like that." You remember, with a washboard? But anyway, so you got to stay home. So the next day when school was happening, I cried. I would cry. Isn't that awful? I would cry. Finally, she'd say to me, was to school we maga. Go on, go to school then. So I don't know if I hated washing or I loved school, so it's one or the other. But I did. But you know, I soon came to realize that everybody wasn't like that. Other people, you know, we have to do something more in our schools. And, you know, this came very clear as I saw some of our students struggling with learning and so on. And I taught like that too. You know, I'm ashamed to say that, but don't forget, I was taught in the normal school, like the teacher's college. And we're not taught how to teach a person of another culture. Even though I came from that culture, I didn't know. And I taught like that. And I think the thing that saved me, because I loved my teaching, I loved my students. We had a good time. I think they really liked me too, so pretty much anyway. But, you know, it's, I think it's because I was a Native person, they could identify with me. And I think that was the big thing. You know, and that was why we went after to work hard to have teacher training programs, because we knew we needed teachers in our schools. We needed to increase the numbers. Look at you here today. Look around this room. We couldn't have had this conference in 1950. Or 60, or 70. Well, now maybe in the latter part of the 70s, but we couldn't have had that. You would just have a handful of people. So I just can say that it's been my passion. I never said to myself as a child growing up, I want to work in the curriculum branch of the ministry. I didn't say to myself, I want to work for the National Indian Brotherhood. There wasn't even one anyway then. But I never said, I didn't aspire to these things. I wasn't aspiring to things. Things just happened for me. You know, the Creator will show you the way. Things happen, just happen. You move from one thing to the other. All I wanted to be was to be in the classroom, be a classroom teacher. When I had opportunities to change that, even to be a principal and to do these other things, I was reluctant to do that. I didn't really want to do that. But then I did, and then, as I say, one thing leads to another. So it has been my passion. My cousin laughs at me because one time, she said, I came home and I said to her, oh my goodness, this is terrible about the housing. I was at this conference and the housing is really, really terrible. And I was telling her this and that. She said, Verna, that's been an issue for a long time. You just have your nose buried in education. Now, I don't think I was quite that naive, but yeah. So then another question is, what was your greatest challenge? Well, if you read my book, high school was a big challenge for me. I thought I was brilliant on the reserve, you know. But when I got to high school, gee, I had a hard time. Part of it was my doing, you know. We're all young once, and we'd rather go dancing and doing all these things than really going to school. And I had those chances when I was in high school. So, but I had a tough time. First, I had a tough time finding a place to go to school. Because at that point, as you see in the book, I wasn't status. So I couldn't go to residential school. So maybe that was a good thing. Probably was. But I went away to another school. I went to Toulon. And so high school was a challenge. University, you know, here I was, I started teaching in 54. I didn't start university courses till 67. I thought I knew everything again. No, I'm just kidding. No, but there's several reasons for that, because there were so many things happening, you know, just going on and on. And finally, I started some university courses. And somebody might wonder, why did she write about these courses she took? If you want utopia, I forget what I said, the reserve is the thing, or our band is the thing, or something like that. But I used the assignments that I had all through my university to answer or to write about our situation, usually our education situation. And so that's the reason I wrote about those things, because we're still faced with that in the universities and when we're studying. There's still the odd program here and there. Now we also have Native Studies departments. But you know, on the whole, if you're a teacher, you really have to look to find courses that are going to be meaningful for you. And so that's what you do. I just wanted to say something about the jobs I've done. You know, I've been one thing after another, actually, all in education. But you know the hardest one? People ask me, which was the hardest job you did? And the hardest one was counseling. After I came from teaching in Norway House, I came to be a counselor in Winnipeg. I had no training as a counselor. Nobody had training as counselors anyway. We just, as long as you taught in an Indian school, you were a counselor in here. That was all under Indian Affairs. So the reason I wanted to be a counselor is I was at Norway House, and I noticed, you know, and I knew this was happening elsewhere, Fisher River and so on, that people were dropping out of school and out of whatever they were doing in their training. So I thought I would go and that I might be able to help. I said to the Indian Affairs guy, Roy Carter, I said to him, I'd like to go to Winnipeg where I can help these students that are in there now going to high school, and there's people in trades, and you know in those days, this is what the girls could do. Clerk, typist, hairdresser. What was the third one now? Can't remember the third one already, but oh yeah, practical nursing. Those were the three main things people were doing in that time. And then they were starting the new private home placement program in the city. But I tell you why it was the hardest. Every one who left, you still get people leaving. The city is a crazy place. Crazier then than it is now. It was new to our people, really. And so what happened, you know, in that case, every student, if we lost a student, it was like a personal loss to me. It was like, what could I have done? My friend Pat McManus came on as a counselor there. We had no training, so I'm giving her a heads up on what to do as a counselor. I said, don't let them drop out. She said that was her only training. Oh my. So, another question was, how do you define teaching in the Native way? Well, I don't think I said the Native way in the book, but anyway, you know, I don't have to explain that to you. You know where I'm coming from, and I've said it already here. You know, teaching in the Native way, it just simply means addressing our needs, relating to our culture, our worldview, listening to our elders, you know, teaching in the Native way. And then the next other question is, what was your greatest accomplishment? Well, it's not really my greatest accomplishment, but what I was involved in that I think has made the biggest difference in Aboriginal education, Indigenous education, is Wabang. For Manitoba, it was the first time that our people of our province, the chiefs of our province and their people came together and put together a position on the direction we wanted to take in education. Thanks to the leadership of the late Dr. Dave Kershane. You know, he was a great leader. I learned so much from him. And, you know, so that was a great thing. And the last time I was here, Lord, I think it was 5 years ago, it was solely to talk about Wabang and Indian control of Indian education. You know, as I think about this, folks, I think to myself, all of you teachers here, educators, have you all, I hope you have all read Wabang. It was printed, reprinted by MFNERC here, you know, and so I hope you have all read Indian Control of Indian Education. I hope you have all read the Indian Act. We have to do these things. And I hope, I'll say more about this later, but I hope you've all read for yourselves the proposed First Nations Education Act. So to me, that was the breakthrough. What we called for in Wabang was control for our people. What we called for in Indian control, you can see the words of Wabang. If you compare them, you can see the words, the strong influence Manitoba had in Indian control of Indian education. So, what was your greatest disappointment? Well, we had a good thing going one time here long ago in the 70s where we were teaching in the native language. Several schools. You know, it's a disappointment to me that that didn't keep on. Rebecca Ross is here. Rebecca did her utmost best to keep that program alive. And it lasted, I think, at least 11 years in Cross Lake for some time. It was, when you teach in your own language, you are teaching your culture. You are relating to things you know. And it should have been, we had 7 schools doing that. It should have gone across the province, maybe the country. We maybe wouldn't be where we are today with the loss of our languages. I'm disappointed in the unfulfilled policy of Indian control of Indian education. I ask people this when I talk about this right now. Try and think, if you're 60 years old here, you have to be at least 60 years old to have witnessed Wabang yourself. Because it's Wabang and Indian control, a year apart, about 42 years, 41, 42 years. So it's 42 years old. So if you're 43, you were 1 year old, a 1 year old when we got that through. You can't even imagine what it was like before then. You know, let's not forget that we have done a lot with that policy. It was not a perfect policy, but we did a lot with it. Look at what you're doing in your schools. I call this Indian control of Indian education. I say silly things all the time, and one of them is, I gave birth to that damn kid. No. At least I gave birth to something. But anyway, no, I was there, and when it happened, I didn't really do that, but I'd use that analogy to go further. We've had a little bit of a malnourished child because we can't feed it right, can't feed it properly the way we want to do it. We're held back because the funding we've been afforded has not been sufficient. You know, I always say, and I'll say it again, if the funding, we were so glad to just get Indian control of Indian education through, that, you know, the details of funding, we didn't go into that detail of funding, so that we should have had a statutory funding guarantee like is proposed in the new bill. We should have had that, but we don't have it. We didn't have it, so we couldn't do what we wanted to do. So look, folks, if we did, we wouldn't be having this conversation today about Bill C-33. We wouldn't. I really think the ideas we had are out there. And so, you know, let me just close this part. I'm not finished yet, but this part here by saying we did a lot with Indian control of Indian education. Again, let's not shortchange ourselves. You know, we can do anything. We could do it better if we had the resources, but we can do anything. So, what do you think of the state of Aboriginal education today? I think I just answered that. You know, when you've lived as long as I have, and you've come from zero to where we are today, I think we're doing well. I think you're doing well. I think you're going to keep on doing well. I think our young people like Amy and Martin are signs that we're going to do well, and we're already doing well. We have the bumps to get through. You know, we have to think about this Education Act. Let me just suggest one thing. You hear a lot of opinions. You hear a lot of assessments about the Act. You know, I'd ask you as educators, I would like educators to have more of a voice. You're the ones in the classroom. You understand that better than lawyers or politicians. Look at the Act. For yourself, make a decision. Make your decision heard. This is a democracy. Tell your chiefs. I don't care what side you're coming on, speak. You know, say what you think. Because look, folks, this is going to be something we're going to have for the next 100 years. Either we're going to have nothing, or we're going to have something, or I don't know. We just have to think. Is this good for us now? Is this going to be moving us forward, as the jargon goes? I've heard like this. When I first heard it, in October, when it first came out, the first bill, I was all in favor, as everybody else was, rejection. Rejection. It was terrible. Then they went to work on it a little more. 5 positions were put forward. Control, respect for inherent rights, treaty rights, funding, statutory funding guarantee, 4.5, lifting the cap from 2% from 2006 to 4.5. That's funding, and 1.9 million to start with. Then, what is the other thing? Language and culture to be supported. Trying to get clarification on a lot of things here. You know, people are worried that they want immersion. Well, immersion is a good way. That's what we want. So let's just say that. We want to make sure it's immersion. It says language of instruction. I can interpret that to mean immersion, but maybe it's interpreted different ways. There was no, they asked for not unilateral decision-making by the minister, and they asked for cooperation, something like that. So anyway, all those went in there. But there's still things in there from the old bill that don't sit right with me because it takes away the control. But I wasn't going to say this, but I did already. What I really wanted to say was, read the bill yourself. Form your own opinion. Make your opinion known to your chiefs, your members of parliament, your, wherever. So what do you hope readers will take away after reading your book? Well, I hope they'll take away the book. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't care. Well, I hope you can see, one of the things I wrote about is some of my struggles, my birth is a curious thing. But whether you're adopted or whether you have no father or whether those two things don't matter. You're a person in your own right, and we have to develop those things. I hope that people will get some sense, especially the young people, of perseverance, that you have to try and persevere. For sure, I hope the history of education comes through. Another question was asked me, how did you navigate all those labels? My labels were non-status, status, treaty, Métis, adopted. And how did I navigate them? I ignored them. They weren't me. Those were labels. I am a Cree woman. And that's how I was brought up. That's how I have lived. And that's how I will continue to try to live. Now, you'll be glad this is the last question, short. I was at a book launch and one of the students, somebody put their hand up and said, so Verna, what next? Oh, I was so glad for that question. I said, I'm 78 years old. Do I have to do something? Thank you.